What's up, YouTube? This is Too Raw for TV. All right, so before I get into this video, shout out to the association around the association, the channel, uh, for doing a video on this. So this is where I saw this from. And apparently, Stephen A. Smith and J.J. Redick, according to reports, are not speaking to one another. All right. Apparently, this has been a situation that's been ongoing for quite some time, and it stems from basically two different things. It stems from uh, the obvious discontent that we've seen when JJ was a frequent contributor on ESPN First Take. As we all may recall, JJ Redick, former NBA player, had an issue with the format of the show. He thought that the formula of the quick take on every issue was maybe, I guess, to put it in the best way, irresponsible journalism. He thought the show should be more substantive. He thought that there should be more X's and O's breakdown of basketball. Stephen A. Smith, of course, fiercely protective of the show that has made made him basically. I mean, that's the show that basically introduced Stephen A. Smith to a broader audience. And ever since the exit of Skip Bayless and the deaths, I would say, of John Saunders and Stuart Scott, Stephen A. pretty much became the face of ESPN. So, being that Stephen A. Smith has a lot of creative control on that show, Stephen A. Smith more than likely took criticism of the show's formula as a criticism of a criticism of him, since that show is basically his vehicle. So if you look at the video from around the association, he does an excellent job of breaking down different situations where they got into on-air arguments. Now, at the time, you can just make the assumption or make the observation that, well, that's just competitive banter. Professionals disagreeing with each other on certain things, but nothing personal. But over the last couple of years, especially over the last year, I'd say, there have been instances where they have said some things that were uh, beneath the belt. Kendrick Perkins, for instance, once criticized J.J. Redick uh, as far as being a member of the Clippers. Remember when he played under Doc Rivers, many of those teams underperformed. One of those teams infamously blew a 3-1 deficit. I don't think JJ was there then in 2020, I think it was in the bubble. They blew a 3-1 deficit to the Denver Nuggets, but he was on one of those other teams that blew a 3-1 deficit. I believe that was to the Houston Rockets at the time. JJ Redick was on that team. And Perkins said, well, that was largely to do to the fact that that team didn't have, quote, any dogs. And JJ took that personal, as I guess anybody would. Then, of course, there have been other times when JJ Redick has taken shots at Stephen A. Smith for saying things that was out of line, being that he's not a professional athlete and doesn't really understand the ins and outs of being a professional athlete on an everyday basis. That apparently got under Stephen A. Smith's skin. And there were other instances where they really went at it, especially when JJ would criticize the show, criticize the format of the show. And that obviously caused, a rift between Stephen A. and Shannon Sharp also, but more so towards Stephen A. Smith. Now, The newer development has been when JJ began doing the podcast with none other than LeBron Ramon James. When he began doing the podcast with LeBron James, it was the timing of it. As we all know, not too deep into the second season, or at least Darvin Ham's second season, there were growing calls for him to be terminated. And right when these calls truly began, which was after the All-Star break, interestingly enough, that's when LeBron James began doing a podcast with JJ Redick, Mind the Game, just as simultaneously calls in the media grew for Darvin Ham to be terminated. And when I say in the media, I'm talking about the usual LeBron lackeys, right? And his fan base. Now, just before JJ got on this podcast, some people noticed that JJ seemed very defensive of LeBron James and the Lakers. And he was losing his objectivity when it came to LeBron James and the Lakers. Some people now believe that behind the scenes, JJ Redick was communicating with LeBron James. Now, don't get me wrong, Nick Wright, Shannon Sharp himself, they're all known for being LeBron James homers, right? But with JJ, he wouldn't criticize LeBron James on anything, making excuses for him. Even situations where, he wasn't taking, guarding his defensive assignments. He was still making excuses for LeBron. Then, in one situation where JJ once again criticized the format of the show, here comes LeBron James on social media taking up for JJ Redick. And then all of a sudden they do their podcast. And as I said before, while Darvin Ham is being criticized for supposedly not knowing the X's and O's of basketball, which is a complete BS, here comes his podcast where JJ is flexing his supposed intellectual muscle when it comes to basketball. Subsequently, after the season, Darvin Ham is terminated, and suddenly JJ Redick becomes a candidate to replace Darvin Ham as the next head coach of Los Angeles Lakers. Now, at this time that this was going on, JJ was still appearing on First Take, but less frequently. First, JJ was being linked to the Charlotte Hornets job. That completely dried up. But once Stephen A. Smith started critiquing the podcast, the timing of the podcast, remember there was a time period a couple weeks ago when Stephen A. flat out said that there were, according to sources, coaches, in particular black coaches, that did not really like how Darvin Ham was terminated. Okay, you can read between the lines in that situation. I got the impression that a lot of black coaches felt like, look, we have a hard enough time getting opportunities from the get-go. And for many, many years, if a black coach did get opportunity, it was always toward a rebuilding franchise or a franchise that really wasn't seen as prestige. If they performed poorly or didn't win, that'd be a good enough excuse to fire the coach. And oftentimes we see this too. When a coach who happens to be black is the coach of a franchise which seems to be on the upswing, suddenly that coach gets terminated and replaced by someone that looks like JJ Redick. So that's kind of what Stephen A. Smith was coming at, but he didn't quite say all of that. That supposedly was the straw that broke the camel's back. And reportedly, they haven't been speaking to each other for weeks. Now, Stephen A. Smith came out and gave some congratulations to JJ on getting the job, but, people could look at that as, that's just him, trying to put window dressing on, sheep. You know what I'm saying? Like at the end of the day, nobody's really being fooled by that. There, you know what I'm saying? There's there's obvious beef there because JJ stopped appearing on the show. Now, it couldn't be just because he was becoming a broadcaster or busy with the podcast, because he still was appearing on other ESPN shows, and he also appeared on independent podcasts, but he stopped appearing on that show. And now when you look at the situation and you uh, look at the clues, it tells you that they have a beef going on. This is my thing. So a lot of to put a lot of there in 10 minutes. Okay. Uh Number one, I don't think JJ should have this goddamn position. Okay. Usually in most situations, unless you have a strong attachment to that franchise, like Jerry West didn't have any head coaching position, head coaching experience before he became the coach of the Lakers in the 70s. But this is Jerry freaking West. Okay. That's Jerry West. It would have been better if JJ, at the very least, had more broadcasting experience and or maybe became an assistant coach for a couple of years and then got a job. Okay, that's more acceptable. But for a guy to just in 3 years, less than 3 years, go from retiring as a player to becoming a contributor to ESPN to becoming on the first team of the ESPN broadcast and now become the head coach of historically the most prestigious franchise, or at least one of the two most prestigious franchises in the history of the NBA. That's BS. Not to mention all the other things that have been going on with JJ Redick over the past couple of years, the allegations. You know what I'm saying? I'm one of the first ones to talk about that before it became a trending topic. All the things that the NBA and the media try to bury when it comes to JJ Redick. I see a lot of people saying, "Oh, why are all these allegations coming now?" No, this stuff's been out there. It's just that the mainstream media chose not to report on it until now. They chose not to report on this stuff. And remember, JJ was playing back then, so they could have reported on it, but they just didn't. They rather report on whatever the heck was the trending topic back then. I guess Colin Kaepernick was more important, than what JJ was talking about or whatever. So I don't think that he should be the head coach of that team, but it is what it is. I hope the Lakers are successful, but I have doubts that it's going to happen. Now, when it comes to Stephen A. Smith, man, this guy he can't get along with anybody. Can he? Can he get along with any goddamn body? I mean, he's not reportedly talking to JJ Redick. We know what happened between him and Max Kellerman. Okay? He got Max Kellerman off the show because Max Kellerman, he couldn't pull that straddling the fence BS that he does. Max has positions that are more in tune with the black community, where Stephen A. Smith comes across as more culturally conservative than Max. So, every time that he would try to pull that, that tap dance routine that he has with Max, it didn't work because he used to play off a guy who is more to the right. So he resented Max for that, especially after Terrell Owens said what he said on the show. We reportedly hear that he had a blow up with Pat McAfee. A lot of that was probably, motivated by the fact that he found out that Pat McAfee was making $30 million a year while he was making only 12. So I'm pretty sure that has something to do with it. Plus, they had some creative differences. Who else? I mean, he's beef with so many other people on that show. I hear there's professional jealousy when it comes to him and Shannon Sharp. They get along, but I hear there's jealousy there, and that's why I think that's one of the reasons why he's getting up out the door. He's getting up out of there because at this point, it's like he's not getting along with anybody over there anymore. You know what I'm saying? And after a certain period of time, you got to wonder, Is it him? You know, he has an ego. Um, he doesn't like to be challenged. And, you know, recently his beef with Monica McNutt. Now, I haven't watched ESPN First Take, but the last time I saw them together, like he was kind of picking on her. So he does seem like the type of guy who can hold grudges and do things behind the scenes that try to, you know what I'm saying, try to get you, I don't know if out the door per se, but he does hold grudges. Uh, we've seen Jalen Rose over the last few years say things sort of, in code. Some people think he might be talking about Stephen A. Smith. I don't know. And I'm not talking about the Molly Curran stuff. I'm just talking about Stephen A. Smith, from what we've read about him and some of the things we hear, he's kind of a shady dude. You know what I mean? But at the end of the day, I don't really give a shit about either one of these two dudes. You know what I'm saying? At the end of the day, if they beef with each other, who cares? Uh, JJ Redick, to me, is an arrogant know-it-all asshole, and Stephen A. Smith is an arrogant, bloviating asshole. And, you know, when you got two people like that together, they're probably not going to get along with each other. But anyway, just want to put this out there for you guys. Tell me what you guys think.